Hi, friends. It's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guilt titled Life as a Journey, Not a Destination. I think I've been growing into the podcast a lot more after I've started to see it as a space for me to kind of just unpack and learn lessons and think out loud, and then also hear from incredible visionaries in my life. And really, the episodes have been serving as lessons for myself as I journey through my own life. And I say that because at the time that I'm recording this episode, there's so many things that are shifting for me. There are so many things that are transitioning currently in my life, both internally and externally. There are a lot of relationships that are fading away. There's a lot of relationships that are on pause, and I don't really know when they're going to resume. And there's a lot of new relationships that are showing up in my life, and they are starting to add incredibly wonderful value to my life. And so, in recording this episode, I think it's interesting because I get to sit back and actually realize that all of these transitions, all of these changes, all of these shifts are actually part of this longer, continuous journey. And that, you don't just show up somewhere and stay there. There is a constant change that is happening around you all the time. I think I've shared in a previous episode that I like to see my life as a solar system where, I am a stable planet. Let's say I'm the sun, because why not? I am the damn sun of my life. I'm the sun, and there's planets that are orbiting around, the sun all the time. And sometimes those planets are closer to the sun, sometimes those planets are away from the sun. And that's okay, because inevitably, once they've journeyed and they've, kind of done their entire journey around the sun, they might come closer, they might go further, they might turn around, and I think that's how I like to see life as a journey. It's not a destination. And so, for me, the longest time in my life, I used to chase life as if it was a destination. I used to live life living from goalpost to goalpost. I finished high school. Immediately after I finished high school, I started my undergrad degree, did like right away, and finished the degree within 4 years, never took a semester off, never took a summer off. And before I had even finished my undergrad degree, I was already applying to grad schools. And as soon as I graduated, I had already, finalized at a grad school. I'd already said yes. I already made plans to move to a different province. And as soon as I finished my, graduate degree, I'd already had a job lined up before I could even graduate and have some time to breathe and just kind of, figure it out and just flow. And I realized very soon that even though I was chasing all these goalposts and I was achieving all these goals, and it's not like I was, not hashtag winning, I was hashtag winning, but I wasn't happy. I was never happy when I reached that goalpost. I was never happy when I got what I wanted, because as soon as I got what I wanted, I couldn't really be present with it because I was already thinking about the next thing that I wanted. And I think that happens a lot, whether it's your career, it's your education, whether it's relationships or your job, anything that we're trying to do. I think we live in this very hustle mentality, and we like making vision boards and we like setting goals, but seldom do we ever sit down and really get present with what it is that we have been chasing this whole time. I think we usually do it just to check a box on the list. And recently, I've been invited a ton to speak to high school students about career, in career classes. And initially, I thought to myself, I don't really think I have that much to offer to, students in a career class, because I haven't really figured out what my career is. I'm not in a position, I'm not necessarily doing what I went to school for. And so, in constructing those presentations or constructing that dialogue, I realized what I can do is actually speak to them about my journey. And even though I may not have necessarily arrived at the destination that I have been setting out to, arrive at, the journey along the way has been really important. And I think it's really important for younger students to learn and hear that sometimes that goal that you set out for, it's not about you just getting to that. It's not about how you're going to feel when you get there, but kind of basking in the journey along the way. Now, this episode is very special because it's with one of my closest friends, Manvinder, also known as EMPWER Music. Manvinder and I met very briefly over Twitter. I guess we had been following each other for a while, or he'd been following me for a while. And as soon as I became friends with him, I found it really hard to like categorize him. I didn't understand, like, is he a music producer? Is he a videographer? Does he take pictures? And, as soon as we became friends, and now that he's been doing a lot more work and a lot more on his own, healing journey, he is also a fascia practitioner. And so the jump from music producer to what he's doing now is a really absurd one if you really back up and think about it, because that's not how we've been conditioned to see journeys, conditioned to see careers. But I'm really excited to talk to him in this episode about life as a journey and not necessarily a destination, because at his wonderful age, at his wonderful point in this journey, he is consistently showing up as a learner and a journeyer and not necessarily someone that is chasing a destination. So I'm excited for you to hear this episode, and I'm excited to see if you've been holding on to that idea of goalpost to goalpost, goal to goal, ambition to ambition. If this episode is going to plant any seeds of perhaps taking a step back and thinking, maybe I can start to see this as a journey and not necessarily as the destination that I'm trying to arrive at. Hi, Manvinder. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you? So happy to be here.
I'm so glad you're here because we have never done something like this before. We've hung out tons and we've gone on walks tons, but we've never actually done anything like a podcast or like done anything outside of like our friendship before.
Yeah, it's gonna be really exciting. We've talked about it a lot, and there's been a lot of good energy exchange. So it'll be nice to actually record it and have other people listen in to learn from the experiences.
Yeah. So when I was kind of thinking about this episode, normally when I have a guest on, like I'll, kind of read out their bio or read out things that they've done. And for you, it was so hard for me to like come up with like a concise bio even in my head, because I was like, okay, what would I introduce Manvinder as? Like, who is Manvinder? Like, what does he do? And I think that even running into that bump was kind of like so indicative of this episode and like the topic and just this idea of life as a journey, not a destination. And, something that I've been thinking about for myself is even like defining myself in a bio. Like sometimes when you're applying to something, or someone asks you to like send over a bio, they're asking for a few lines that describe who you are. And recently I've been really bumping into that because I'm like, I don't know how to define myself. Like I'm so much more than just that word or that word or that hat or that hat. And I feel like I was running into something very similar when I was trying to like describe you, like, in my documents or like just in general when I was planning out the season. um, Tell me about this like never ending bio that you have, because I think that you're someone that I know who's worn many hats, and at many times in your life differently, you've worn different hats and multiple hats at the same time.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I've run into the exact same problem whenever it's come to having to write a bio or explain a little bit about myself. It's like, how do I really explain this? Because I've been searching for answers for that exact question, which is like, who am I really? And just trying to define that really has been what my journey has been all about. And I feel like I'm someone who's always been someone who surrenders to the flow. So I've been flowing for a lot of my life and just kind of seeing where life takes me and not necessarily putting too much energy into an exact destination. Because as the title of this episode is that life is a journey, it's not about the destination. So it never really was about the destination for me. But life itself and society dictated that there needed to be a destination that I aligned with. So I think for me, the journey really started on trying to find out, well, what is it that aligns with me and who am I? And as we're growing up, especially like in school, everyone, the first things we're asked is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And at such a young age, it's nice to fantasize and have all these ideas, but we really don't know who we are and what we want to be. So I think for me, it was always about just trying to find things that aligned with me and go with them, but not necessarily become attached to them, which is
Mhm.
kind of what we are almost trained to think or programmed to be that way, is where you have to find this one thing that you really like and then you're going to stick with that your whole life, which for me never really aligned with me. I think maybe because I'm a water sign, it could be the astrology involved, but I think that aspect of myself is what kept propelling myself forward, wanting to learn and grow more. So coming from like a creative background, I started more in film school, which is a really interesting place for me to start because I never thought that's where I would begin. I always wanted to like make video games and do cool stuff in like 3D. And for me, that was kind of where I wanted to start, and that kind of piqued my interest. So I learned that over time, I began to follow where my energy was flowing. And I tried to really honor that. And a lot of times in school, we're taught to not honor that energy or go against it because it may be flowing against what our destination is. But as we go forward, we realize that our destination is not really a straightforward path. It branches off in many directions, and no one really tells us that. We just kind of have to figure it out on our own. And sometimes we think we're going in the wrong direction. Like we got directions. We have this map that's been given to us, and a lot of times we're taking itineraries from other people too. Just because we're so young, we're not really sure what we need to do. So people are like, okay, well, where do you want to go? Okay, this is how you get there. These are the things you need to do. These are the items you need to acquire on your journey. So um, I became a fan of just wanting to create my own map rather than just finding something that was already there. And I think I began to really understand that like most of your learning comes from the actual experience of traveling and not really like being at your final destination. So I think that is really the like mantra that was kind of ongoing in the back of my mind subconsciously as I was, on my travels and trying to figure out, what is it that I wanted to be? Because the more and more I dove into that question, the next question that came after that was like, okay, well, who am I? Because that is deeply tied to that connection. And so, yeah, like as you were saying, I've kind of been wearing many, many hats, and each different experience, as I will call it, or job or career experience, or even the people we meet, they're all kind of. I realize that they're helping me gain reference for myself and who I am as a person, rather than trying to getting attached to this one idea of a career or a place and sticking a flag on it and being like, hey, this is me, this is who I am. It was more about using those experiences to learn more about myself. So it started in film, and then it kind of veered off into music, more creative endeavors. And I lived in that world for quite a while where I was creating films, met a lot of really amazing people. And that's how I met a lot of the people who are now currently in my creative circle. Um, and that kind of led me more onto a musical journey. After connecting with film, it showed me that, well, music is the aspect that I really connect with. And again, that showed me another aspect of myself. And then when I dove into that, more layers were revealed. Music is a very emotional journey. And so that taught me a lot about my emotions. And as I got more in tune with my emotions, there were more layers of my ego and myself that were revealed. And yeah, just continuing to work on myself, the journey keeps unfolding. And so I think for me, it was more about staying true to you, staying true to yourself and who you are, and not really being content with a certain place or destination because, yeah, it is about the journies.
Mhm. That's it, folks. That's the podcast. That's the episode. Manvinder said everything that we needed to hear. I didn't want you to stop talking. You said so many things there. Like so many things jumped out to me. And I'm in a place right now where I have just learned to surrender to the flow of it. And I was just saying a little while ago, maybe about a month ago, that this is probably the happiest that I've been. And initially, I kept saying that this is the happiest I've ever been professionally. But then I realized this is actually the happiest I've ever been ever, even though there's like shit happening all the time or there's stuff happening all the time. I think the reason for my happiness is because I've started to place that happiness inside of myself and not necessarily within a goalpost that I was chasing or an opportunity that I was chasing or something that I was thinking that I really wanted and then I got it. And I think it's because I've started to really embrace this entire journey and step back and think to myself, well, every time I get somewhere, I'm not happy there, because then I'm already thinking about the next thing. I'm already thinking about what's coming up. But then I lose that, like, there's this idea that there's like intrinsic value in who I am, and where I am is also very okay. And it's beautiful where I'm at. It might not be where I want to be tomorrow, but even the where I'm at today is very, very valuable. But I think that this isn't something that you just wake up to and and it happens for you. Like you said, like, it's something that we're consistently taught a lot in school while we're younger. And I think that moment when you actually wake up and, you realize that it actually doesn't have to be that way. You don't actually have to be like that one thing that you've been chasing or you've been taught to be, or, you don't have to occupy that same space and wear that one hat for the rest of your life. I think that realization is a huge one. At least for me, it was. I was like, oh, like, I actually don't have to be X, Y, and Z. I can just be me.
Totally, and that's kind of the experience that I've been going through, and I think that's a really powerful place to be, is to understand where your happiness lies and not really attaching it to something.
Hmm.
And as I was listening to you saying that, it kind of brought up a couple thoughts where the main drivers in our travels and our journeys, if we think about human motion and how motion works, when you want to get up and walk, there's a certain emotion that is the driver of that. And so for you to actually get up and decide to go somewhere, it takes in a desire first, and a desire
Hmm.
is what really drives us. So once you have the desire, then you get up and you decide to move. But once you're moving, it's the fear of falling down that keeps you moving forward.
Hmm.
And so we have to understand, where is the desire coming from? And this is what I learned more recently. And actually, astrology helped me understand this. Was
Hmm.
how do we filter our desires and our decisions? And for a long time, our ego is what takes control. And for me, I was subconsciously filtering a lot of decisions through that and not necessarily filtering them through my heart. And so somewhere along in our travels, our decisions or desires will lead us astray because they haven't been aligned with our heart at some point. And so that's usually when we have moments of potential trauma or disconnect, or what you described as arriving at the destination and still being unhappy.
Hmm.
Somewhere along the line, there's a disconnection between your heart and your ego, or your desire to be there. And so for me, I think it was like a continuous recalibration, um, of, just like you were saying, getting to a destination but not being, completely happy. And that forced a new learning for me, and then it forced another direction, and then the fork, your path basically branches and forks, and you're allowed to make new decisions. And you might be going in the same general direction, but you're going to be taking a lot of lefts, rights, turns, going in all these different directions. You might take a detour into a cave, we don't know, right? But
Hmm.
if you're really set on getting to a set destination, these detours are really going to take you off of your like zen true space. But they really shouldn't. The only reason they're taking you off of your out of your neutral zone is because you set an expectation. But if
Hmm.
you've deleted those expectations, every turn is like a mystery. It's there's so much wonder and learning to be had in those moments. But if you're not looking for those things, then you're not going to see it. You're going to be blind to those moments.
And a lot of it is like, being able to step back and seeing everything as a stepping stone and seeing the beauty in those detours, because it might seem like, it might seem like you're being taken off course, but really it's just a divine it's a divine orchestration. How do you say that word?
Divine orchestration.
Divine orchestration of the way that things are meant to be. Um, and, if you lean into the detour, if you lean into the readjustment, you would realize that you're actually just being reoriented towards your goal. Maybe you're just going through a different path. As you were talking, I was thinking about how, I remember saying to, a coach once. I was working with a coach because I was like, dude, I have a master's degree and I'm really unhappy. I'm supposed to be happy right now. And she was like, let's step back. And I said to her, I said, the way that I've been kind of living my life is I see this like toolbox next to me, and I'm just filling this toolbox with like anything and everything that I can find, because I want to be able to One day, like, what if I'm doing something and I need a tool? And if I don't have it, then I might fail at it. But if I've got a toolbox full of all these random tools, I can kind of, open up the toolbox and put my hand in and take it out, and then I'll be secure and I'll be fine and I can do what I want to do. And she said to me, she's like, it's great that you have a toolbox and you want to fill your toolbox, but you don't even know what you're building. What if you get
Mm.
to that building or whatever, and this thing shows up for you, you have all the wrong tools, right? And so because I was filtering out the tools and saying, no, I only want these ones because I think these are the ones I'm going to need, I wasn't allowing for any room for any other tools that might have found a really valuable spot in my toolbox. And because none of us actually know what it is that we're building. We don't actually know which tool we're going to need. And if we keep closing ourselves off to all the different possibilities, what if we get there? Or like, what if along the way we just find that that's actually not what I wanted to build at all?
That is a really beautiful way to put it, and that's so true. As you're saying that, it just made me think of identity because we end up aligning ourselves, our identities, a lot of times with either our destination or, like you said, your tools. We start identifying
Mhm.
ourselves as like, I am these tools, but you're not. You're something more beyond that. And it's the idea behind it that's using the tools that we really have to identify with. But I think we end up getting lost in that route, and we end up identifying with, I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, and then we become that thing, and then that thing ends up filtering our thoughts, like you're saying. And that's what happened to me. I started identifying myself as a creator for a large portion of my life. I was like, okay, I'm an artist. This is what I do. These are the people I'm supposed to be with. These are the type of people I would want to be with. We create all these rules and expectations for how we decide to live our life. But again, they're in my eyes now, they're creating limiting beliefs on where we can go, and just putting like a ceiling on the potential, because as humans we really do have infinite potential. So the best way to really, I think, um, cultivate that kind of energy is to understand that although happiness is a goal and that should be aligned with it, I think a goal shouldn't be to be happy all the time, because
Mhm.
in the end happiness is an emotion, just like sadness is. And if you think of happiness as an emotion, that's something that's pulling us out of neutral being a zero, and neutral is where we are like our zen true selves, that nothing is pulling us away. And as we move through our life, there's always going to be these things that pull us away from being neutral. Sometimes there's friends, sometimes it's like toxic energy, sometimes it's like really really good energy, but if you think about how you feel when you're in happiness, it affects your decisions. It changes who you are, what you're doing. It's a different flood of chemistry in your body, and so that changes the way we perceive things. And you might not always make the best decisions when you're in extreme happiness, and the
Mhm.
same goes for sadness, extreme sadness. So in that sense, you may not want to live there all the time. It's nice to experience these things, but truly, I think for me, it's about what is something that's going to keep me at neutral, but then also allow me to have all these experiences. And when we
Mhm.
have these experiences, these different emotions, sadness, joy, fear, they're all giving us more reference in terms of who we are as a person. And same with our friends. Like when you go and you check in with your friends, yes, you're checking in with them, but you're really checking in with yourself. You're seeing how
Mm.
much you've changed as well. And I think that's
Yeah.
a powerful place and a powerful, I guess, mindset to have, is when you understand that and you're able to be more in observation of the flow. Because there is one
Mhm.
downfall of the flow, is that you're so present. It's like a form of being ultra present where everything else seems to fall away. It's almost like being in tunnel vision, for those who haven't been in flow or don't understand it. I'm sure you all have, but maybe you just don't know it. It's like when you forget that time exists when you're working on something and everything just kind of fades away. Those are usually in times of passion or things that we really enjoy. Like when I make music, it's like, there's an energy that's being channeled through me. It's really not even me, it feels like. But that form of being ultra present doesn't always align with structure. As you know, flow has curves. It's like water, it wants to move. But as soon as you try to put structure around it, it creates a little bit of resistance. And so I think
Mhm.
being in flow is it's like a balance of being in and out of it, learning how to navigate it, because we do need structure. You can't have a life that's completely flow. There are things like scheduling and things in our life where, a schedule or structure is demanding and we need it and it helps us. So I think for
Mhm.
me, it's like, how do I create a form of flow and structure that aligns with me and the place where I want to go? And it, again, for me, it's not really a set destination. I think your destination is allowed to move, and because you move, you grow and you change. And to set yourself to an idea you had when you were like 10 years old, I mean, it's fun to think about, but at the same time, it's like you've changed so much. So it's okay to let yourself grow with those ideas.
Totally. Totally. I think that you said this to me once. I learned this from you that electricity follows the path of least resistance. And
Hmm.
you're saying like structure is also important. I think that yes, the point isn't that you throw your hands in the air, abandon everything, move away, and become a hippie for the rest of your life. That's not the point, even though that's very enticing and very, very attractive.
Hmm.
That's not the point. I think that you can still be a very ambitious person and still, have goals for yourself, make those mood boards, write those goals out, but the idea comes from the detachment. Like, I think the success for me has come from the detachment of those things, in saying that I would like this, but I will be fine otherwise, even if I do not get this, because this is not what makes me me. Me being enough, me being, who I am, despite whether I get that or not, is good enough for me. I think something that I was also thinking about, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but then also when you were speaking now, I think that it's interesting because as soon as I started to show up as my full self and in my full capacity in just my everyday life, it also started happening for me. I mean, even the way that I'm about to say it is like, I think I want to get away from seeing your life as like fragments. Like,
Hmm.
professionally and personally, right? Like, I think there's usually this split between like, this is my personal life and this is my professional life. But your personal life is also like, you're showing up as your personal self in your personal life, sorry, your professional life. And then your professional life is something that you do every single day. It's who you are. I think a common trope that we fall into is that, these things are all separate. And for me, I have found resistance always when I try to separate these parts of myself and
Hmm.
compartmentalize different parts of myself. Like, okay, like I like speaking, so I'm going to be a podcast host, and that's all I'm going to do. Anytime I want to share something or I want to talk about something, I'm only going to do it in the space of a podcast. Or, I'm a very organized person. And so I'm going to take on a role career wise that allows me to flourish in my organizational skills. But I think for me, when I started to find that I was unhappy again and again, mostly was when I was being only parts of myself in specific spaces. And I used to think that it was everybody else that was doing it to me. But then I slowly realized I'm doing a disservice to myself because I'm only showing up of 1/4 of Harpo in this space, or I'm showing up as only 2/3 of Harpo in this relationship. I think when I started to like really fully embody who I am, did opportunities that align with that person and, all fourths of Harpo, did those opportunities start to come in? Did those, I mean, I think those relationships are starting to come in. They're not fully here yet, but I can start to see the shift where, I'm not just being 1/4 of myself, and those relationships are starting to fall away now. And the relationships that allow me to be fully myself are starting to show up. I think that's when I have found that everything starts to align. It might not make me happy all the time, like you said, but there's so much more neutrality in those spaces because now I'm doing work that I might not have quote unquote gone to school for, or, I might not be kind of in a space where I thought I was going to be when I applied to get a master's degree, but it still works somehow because an element of Harpo was showing up in those spaces. And then that element of Harpo is still being given space in all these other spaces now.
Hmm. Yeah, I can definitely align with that. I think what you mentioned there about fragments is a really powerful statement, is because I think a lot of us end up aligning with our fragments, but our souls and ourselves, we are truly like multidimensional beings. We have
Mhm.
so many different aspects to ourselves. And so if society is telling you to align with just one or two of them and you do and you're unhappy, well, whose fault is that? Is it society's fault or is it yours, right? So we
Mhm.
have to really take ownership of like our whole self, like you were saying. And I think for me, it's really taught me that as you align with all aspects of yourself and you try to bring them together, I think I read this somewhere once, is that our soul is like this shattered mirror, and if you think about each fragment as being like a different aspect of yourself,
Mhm.
they're all kind of flown out into space time. And as we begin to learn more and more about ourselves, as we begin to gain more reference and create more connections, add more tools to our toolbox, these fragments begin to kind of flow together. And eventually we'll
Mhm.
realize they're not fragments at all. They all make up this one whole piece. But if
Yeah.
we start aligning with our fragments, if you try looking into a shattered mirror, like what are you going to see? What is the reflection going to be? Right? It's a reflection of ourselves and how we see ourselves. So I think when we try to align with only a small portion of ourselves, that's really pulling ourselves out of neutral. It's pulling ourselves out of our wholeness. And I think I experienced that when I tried to, when I arrived at a certain destination, or I think the metaphor I used previously was that it's kind of like an island.
Yeah. I
These
love this metaphor. I was hoping you would bring it up.
Yeah, it's like our career, our friends, these places that we go in our lives are all like these different islands. If you think about ourselves being out on the open ocean and there's literally nothing around us, sky is blue, you can't really tell if you're moving. You know you're going in a certain direction, but you don't really know where. And as soon as you see a landmark in the distance, it gives you a sense of direction. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm moving left, I'm moving north, south. So when we move around in our lives and when we're deciding like, oh, I want to be a lawyer, we're basically discovering new islands. And our
Mm.
islands are giving us reference points to where we are in space and time and where we are in terms of our directions of life. And as we go about life, we're basically discovering more and more islands, your friends, these new places that you go, these travel experiences, all of these different things. We're basically gathering all these different islands in our lives. But as we learn and learn, we actually realize, and society also tells us, well, you just have to pick one island, and that's the one you want to live on. And for me, it was really hard because every island I go to, I'd realize like, okay, this is cool, but I want to discover another one. And so
Mhm.
my many hats became as a result of searching for these islands. And as I was on my like journey of searching, I kept kind of thinking to myself, like, am I gonna have to just pick one of these? Like there's this internal struggle that happens. And there's also judgments that get created in terms of how you're perceiving them or how others might perceive you. And until I met other people who were doing the same, other, I don't know, I guess you can call them explorers or travelers who are also collecting islands and not just picking one, because a lot of people in our lives end up aligning with just one island. Um, when I met other people who are also doing the same thing, I realized that I was actually just learning about myself. Islands are just reference points for you. They allow you to learn about yourself.
Mhm.
And so if we sit in a line with one of them, we're really just aligning with, like you said, one fragment of ourselves. So these fragments or islands, they're more about helping us learning about ourselves, really. And I think the more and more you collect islands, the more you actually end up learning about yourself, which is counterintuitive. And I think when I learned that aspect, everything really clicked for me, and it kind of showed me that all of these things that I've been learning of going into film and music and then health and now wellness, working with fascia, there were all steps to get to a certain place, but they were also all very much interconnected. And they're interconnected because they're kind of revealing to me who I truly am.
Yeah. You're just island hopping, and I think if we're allowed to bar hop, why can't we island hop?
That's right. That's right. And we shouldn't get, hung up with just being on one island, you know.
There's so many different beautiful islands to explore. And as you're talking, one of my favorite songs, the line from my favorite song is playing in my head. It's a Mumford and Sons song, and the song is called Wilder Mind. I talk about it all the time. But
Mm,
there's a line in that song that says, "You can be every little thing you want nobody to know. And I love that. Like, I live by that. I embody it. I want it tattooed on my body someday, because you really can be all that you really truly want to be. Even those things and those ideas that we had in our heads when we were kids that were just like passing fleeting thoughts. Like, I always used to watch Sex in the City and see Carrie Bradshaw, and I was like, oh, I would love to be like a column writer or an advice writer in a magazine. I can still do that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, that hasn't gone anyway. Like, it's not that that can't happen. And I think that's what I would love for people to really embrace and sit with, that they can truly be all that they really want to be. There is no one that is telling them that they can't be those things, except for perhaps the voice in our heads. And those voices are actually, they're ours, but I think that the conditioning and the stories that they're telling us are not actually ours. They've all, been things that we've picked up along the way. But if we just get quiet with our own voices and try to listen for our truest authentic voice, we would hear that we truly can be all that we want to be.
Truly, truly, it's literally limitless potential, and it's like infinite. And I think working with fascia recently, which has been my most recent endeavor, has really taught me a lot about belief and perception, because that's really what fascia is it governs our belief and perception. And as we shift our belief and perception, your entire body also shifts. And it really
Mhm.
shows the power of placebo and how powerful that really is. Most medicine is still measured against the power of placebo, which is the power of our mind. And so when you truly, truly believe something and it comes from your heart, then the universe will manifest these things because it's
Mhm.
aligning with you and you're emitting that frequency. But until you decide to emit that frequency, then there's really nothing that can resonate with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, my dear friend. You have added all this exponential value into my life, and I'm glad that, albeit only half an hour of it, I'm really glad that other people are also getting a glimpse into this, because I think that these were conversations, and this was a train of thought and a way of living, really. I was talking about this in the intro too. It's like this idea of like really surrendering to the flow of life and embracing what life actually is. I never had any of this when I was journeying earlier in my life, and to have found this at this pivotal moment in my journey in my life just means the world to me. And thank you for being the vessel through which I've received all these lessons from the universe.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. I think the universe will always align us with the people and the experiences that we need in the moment. So I think the feeling is completely mutual.